It is October 1962. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a Soviet submarine has lost contact with Moscow. The captain believes World War III has already started. He has a nuclear torpedo. He has given the order to fire it. And the only thing standing between that torpedo and the beginning of the end is one man who refuses to agree. Nobody on the surface knows any of this is happening. On October 14, 1962, a US U-2 spy plane made a routine pass over Cuba and took a photograph that changed everything. The images were processed overnight and delivered to the White House the following morning. They showed Soviet nuclear missile sites under construction 90 miles from the coast of Florida, missiles capable of hitting Washington, New York, Chicago, and most of the eastern United States in under 5 minutes. This was not a rumor, not an intelligence estimate, not a theory. It was photographic proof that the Soviet Union had placed nuclear weapons close enough to America to end it before anyone could respond. President Kennedy was briefed at 9 a.m. on October 16th. He said nothing publicly. He cancelled nothing on his schedule. He smiled through meetings and press appearances as if nothing had happened. He shook hands. He gave interviews. He performed the presidency while carrying information that would have caused mass panic if it had leaked. Because behind closed doors, he had assembled a secret group of his most trusted advisors, 12 men who would become known as the XCOM, and given them one question to answer: what do we do? The first option was an airstrike. Destroy the missile sites before they became operational. Clean, fast, decisive. Except the Pentagon could not guarantee every site would be hit simultaneously. One surviving missile, one surviving launch crew. That was all it would take. And an airstrike would kill Soviet military personnel on the ground, an act of war that Moscow could not ignore. The second option was a full invasion. Boots on the ground. Remove the missiles and the government that invited them. Except Cuba already had Soviet troops stationed across the island. An invasion meant direct combat with Soviet soldiers. And if Soviet soldiers died on Cuban soil, what would Moscow do next? Berlin was surrounded. Europe was exposed. One invasion could become a continent on fire. The third option was to do nothing. Accept the missiles. Live with them. Except Kennedy had publicly promised the American people that Soviet offensive weapons in Cuba would not be tolerated. Doing nothing was not just surrender. It was the kind of surrender that tells your enemy exactly how far they can push you. And then there was the fourth option: a naval blockade. A ring of warships around Cuba to stop Soviet ships from delivering more weapons. It bought time. It created pressure without immediate violence. But a blockade was technically an act of war under international law. Kennedy called it a quarantine, specifically to sidestep that definition. And it did nothing about the missiles already on the ground. There was no good option. There was only the question of which gamble was least likely to end the world. For 6 days, Kennedy deliberated in secret. For 6 days, the American public woke up, went to work, made dinner, and put their children to bed with no idea that their president was managing the most dangerous standoff in the history of civilization. Then on the evening of October 22nd, he went on national television. His face was grim. His words were precise. He told the American people what the U-2 had found. He announced the naval quarantine, and he delivered a message directly to Moscow. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full, retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Soviet ships were already at sea, already sailing toward Cuba, and they did not immediately change course. The blockade line was set at 500 miles from the Cuban coast. US warships took their positions. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines tracking Soviet vessels beneath the surface. The entire US military had been placed on DEFCON 3, one step below readiness for nuclear war. Strategic Air Command went to DEFCON 2. For the only time in history, American nuclear bombers were in the air around the clock, loaded and ready, waiting for an order that nobody wanted to give. The world watched, and the Soviet fleet kept moving. This is the moment the crisis nearly became irreversible. On October 24th, Soviet ships approached the blockade line. US Navy vessels were ready, weapons were armed. The intercept order was in place. Intelligence officers in Washington tracked every Soviet vessel in real time. And then, the Soviet ships slowed. Some stopped dead in the water. Some turned around entirely. Secretary of State Dean Rusk turned to his colleague George Bundy and said, "We're eyeball to eyeball," and I think the other fellow just blinked. What Rusk did not say, and what would not be confirmed for decades, was that the Soviet ships had actually begun turning back the day before. The confrontation that defined the crisis, the moment that became the most quoted line of the Cold War, never quite happened the way anyone described it. The myth was already being built while the crisis was still unfolding. But the real danger was not at the blockade line. It was somewhere no one was looking. Because here is what Kennedy did not know. The Soviet Union had not just placed the long-range missiles that the U-2 had photographed. They had already delivered tactical nuclear weapons to the ground in Cuba, battlefield nuclear warheads, shorter-range weapons that local Soviet commanders had been given authority to use if the United States launched an invasion. American troops storming the beaches of Cuba would have walked directly into a nuclear ambush. The invasion option that Kennedy's military advisors kept pushing for would have triggered a nuclear exchange before the first American soldier reached the shore. The men advising Kennedy to invade did not know this. Kennedy did not know this. The CIA did not know this. It would not be confirmed until the Soviet archives partially opened decades later. The clock was running out. Negotiations between Kennedy and Khrushchev were happening through written letters, actual handwritten correspondence carried by hand through diplomatic channels, because there was no direct communication line between Washington and Moscow. A letter sent one day might not be received until the following morning. Every hour of delay was an hour the situation could spiral beyond anyone's control. Then, on October 27th, the situation fractured. A US U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed. Kennedy's military advisors told him this was an unambiguous act of war, requiring immediate retaliation. Every military instinct said strike back. Every protocol said retaliate. The Joint Chiefs were unanimous. Hit the missile sites. Now! Kennedy refused. He held the line on the surface. He kept talking. He kept the letters moving. And while he was doing that, while the entire visible crisis was playing out between two leaders through handwritten letters and televised addresses, something was happening 400 feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean that nobody in Washington or Moscow knew anything about. Deep below the surface, a Soviet submarine designated B-59 had been under pursuit by US Navy destroyers for hours. The submarine had lost radio contact with Moscow days earlier. The air conditioning had failed in the Caribbean heat. The temperature inside the vessel had reached 37 degrees Celsius. Sailors were collapsing. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. Men were hallucinating. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, had been awake for days. He had no idea what was happening on the surface. He did not know if negotiations were continuing. He did not know if his country had been attacked. He did not know if the war had already started. What he did know was that the Americans were dropping depth charges around his submarine. He made his decision. "We will die," he said, "but we will sink them all." He ordered the nuclear torpedo to be armed and loaded, one weapon, equivalent to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, aimed at the USS Randolph, an American aircraft carrier on the surface above him. On most Soviet submarines, the captain alone could authorize a nuclear launch. On B-59, The command structure was different. Because of the unique authority of the flotilla's senior officer, who happened to be aboard, a third sign-off was required. The captain said yes. The political officer said yes. The third man was a naval officer named Vasily Arkhipov. He said no. He did not panic. He did not argue loudly. He sat across from a captain who believed the world was ending and calmly made his case. "The Americans are not attacking us," he said. "If a real war had started, they would not be wasting 11 destroyers on a single submarine. They would have already bombed Moscow. The depth charges are a signal. They want us to surface. They do not even know what we are carrying." The argument lasted long enough. Savitsky stood down. The torpedo was stood down. B-59 surfaced. It emerged into a circle of 11 US destroyers and an aircraft carrier. The crew looked up at the American ships surrounding them, exhausted, barely conscious, half blind from the heat. The Americans did not board. They did not search. They signaled with searchlights and let the submarine go. They had no idea it was carrying a nuclear weapon. They would not find out for decades. On October 28th, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet missiles would be removed from Cuba. The crisis was over. The public exhaled. The newspapers declared victory. Kennedy had stared down the Soviet Union and won. But here is what the world was not told for 25 years. There was a second deal. A secret one made through back channels the night before the public announcement. In exchange for the Soviet missiles leaving Cuba, the United States would secretly remove its own nuclear missiles from Turkey within 6 months. Kennedy had made a trade. And he kept it classified because admitting it publicly would have looked like a concession, like America had blinked too. The crisis that the world was told was a clean American victory was actually a mutual agreement. Both sides gave something. Only one side admitted it. 13 days. 2 leaders exchanging handwritten letters while their militaries prepared for a war that would have killed hundreds of millions of people. One submarine captain who believed the apocalypse had begun, and one officer in the dark 400 feet underwater who refused to agree. Robert McNamara, Kennedy's own Secretary of Defense, said decades later, "We came very, very close. Closer than we knew at the time. Closer than we should ever allow again." Vasily Arkhipov died in 1998. His family said he never spoke about what happened on B-59. It was classified for most of his life. He carried it for 36 years in silence. In 2017, 55 years after that night beneath the Atlantic, he was posthumously awarded the Future of Life Award. The citation described him simply as the man who prevented World War III. His wife Olga accepted on his behalf. She said, "I was and always will be proud of my husband. He is the man who saved the world." Most people alive today are alive because of a decision made in the dark by a man whose name they have never heard. If this made you see how close it really came, subscribe to History Brief. Every video on this channel goes deeper than the version of history you were taught.